So, just to introduce myself, I'm Mark Wilson-Thomas. I'm a program manager on the team that built the WPF designer in Visual Studio 2008. So I just wanted to ask before I got started, how many of you are already using Visual Studio 2008? And in particular, out of that group, how many of you are using the WPF designer? So there's a fair number of scattering out there. That's cool. That's good to hear. So just give you a heads up on what to expect in this presentation. So what I'm really going to try and show you, the first part of the presentation, is to give you an overview of the kinds of application that WPF can deliver for you. Now, some of these applications you may have seen before if you've been around in the WPF space for a while, but just wanted, for the sake of level setting, bringing people up so that you can all understand just what kind of applications we're talking about with this new framework. And secondly, I'm going to show you how Visual Studio 2008 and our sister product Expression Blend can work together, so enabling you to build and deploy those WPF applications in the wild. I'll get into a little bit of detail in terms of looking at Visual Studio 2008 itself and the WPF designer. We'll be looking at what kinds of work you can do on our design surface and when you're going to have to be working in the XAML editor. And some of you might well prefer to. I was talking to a gentleman beforehand who really prefers to work in the XAML editor. I know there are a number of people who do prefer that. There are times when you can do things on the design surface, and there are other times when you have to resort to XAML. You'll hopefully get a clear picture of what those times are from this session. A little bit about the much vaunted designer-developer workflow, and that's another little question for the audience. Who here would count themselves as having some design skills? I know that's a pretty weighted question, right? And mainly developers in the house, yeah? So who would say you were a developer? Cool. Okay. So just to kind of give me a feel for who's out there. So just this final point here. This is a Visual Studio and WPF-centered session. If you've come for the Silverlight 2 sessions, they're going to be next door later on and in a whole bunch of other places. I don't have any Silverlight 2 material here, so if you've come for that, you're going to be disappointed, and you might want to go somewhere else. And there's a very limited blend coverage. I'm not a blend expert. I'm not going to claim to be one or play one on television. So that's where we're at. So first off, I'm going to dive in and show you a number of real-world WPF applications. And all of these applications are deployed in the wild, apart from one of them, and I'll talk some more about that. So let's flip over and have a quick look at the demos. So this first one, actually, is an application developed in the UK, and you might have guessed from my accent that I'm not from around these parts. So I come from the UK, and the team that I used to be part of in the UK actually built this application. This is for the British Library in London. Now, British Library has a monumental collection of books. Some of them are extremely old, very precious. Clearly, they're not the kind of thing that you tend to let people get their hands on very often, and when you do, they're wearing gloves and in a special humidity-controlled room. But the British Library had a real mandate to try and get their stuff out there so that people can see. How many people have seen this application before? Yeah, a fair few, because it's actually becoming pretty famous. I love this thing. What's great about this application is it lets you get your hands on things that you'd never otherwise do. So I can take hold of this ancient gospel. This is like a manuscript from the Middle Ages. And I can open it up and turn pages, and you see how there's a beautiful kind of physics model underneath there that makes those pages feel like real parchment. And I can take hold of a magnifying glass here, and I can zoom right on in to see the beautiful illustrations and illuminations. I can even make notes, in fact, in this application. You can see there's quite a nice little set of controls down at the bottom here that let me do all manner of interesting things. I can zoom in a little further on the whole document so that I can get an even closer view. And that's the kind of thing that, imagine building this application. This is web deployed. You'll see the web address right there at the top. This is what's called an XBAP application. Imagine building that using earlier technologies. I mean, don't even worry about whether you could deploy it on the web. Just start thinking about what it would have taken to build this using earlier UI technologies. And you'll see that things like the zoom capability, the graphics accelerated 3D capabilities that you're seeing here. All of those things are things that are baked right into the WPF platform and that allow you to get a much faster start on applications like this one. Second application we can look at here, this is called iBlocks. How many have seen this guy? Nobody's seen iBlocks, that's interesting. This is actually a little mashup application, and you can see it's going to allow me to pick from one of these mods, and then I can decorate it, so I can get a little bit of drag and drop here. Then I can go ahead and find some pieces from my media collection and decorate the thing.
iBlocks rocks!
Stick a few bits and pieces up here. And the idea is this is just a kind of non-linear way of sharing this kind of stuff with your friends. And if I was ready to, I could load this thing right up onto the internet, but I can play it out here. And if I touch one of these as it comes around, I'm going to lose it. I can nudge it around, this kind of stuff.
iBlocks rocks!
And it'll play out the content. I won't save that now. But that's just for users who are wanting to make mashups on the internet, and that's kind of a rich visual editing environment there for them to do that. Something a little bit more linear, but nonetheless content-rich. So some of you will probably have seen the New York Times Reader application. This is actually another of the same generation of applications here. This is the local paper up in Seattle, the Post-Intelligencer. And what you're looking at here is a rich newspaper reading app. And you might think, well, hey, couldn't I do most of that stuff on a web page? Well, that might well be true, but reading it offline is a problem. And doing some of the amazing things that this application does with text would be a little harder to achieve if you were to be working in just an ordinary web page. It also has great printing support. And all of these are just platform features that you can hook into and that you don't have to write for yourself. In fact, when I flip back to the slide deck, one point that I want to make about this application is there's actually a starter kit out there that will help you to get started building this kind of application on top of WPF. So I'll come back to that. And another application that you might have seen around, I don't know if any of you are using this to track your sessions, but this is quite a nice little WPF UI. Once again, it does offline capability. It allows me to get some nice animated transitions going there. This is a nice data-bound application that lets me manage my agenda here. And you can see that it's got some pleasant and kind of engaging things. I'm not sure that you can see it from where you are, but there's a very, very subtle little animation running in the background there. Just gives you a little bit of texture. It doesn't really show up on the big screen there. For these kinds of rich, offlineable applications, you can build these a whole lot easier now than you used to be able to with the power of WPF. And I mentioned that there's one application that we're going to look at that isn't a public one, and that's because it's really just a sample. But this is the application that we'll be building today. This is you notice it's got some very nice resize behavior here, and we'll come back to that in a moment. This is called AdventureWorks Pulse. The idea behind it is it's a notional kind of health application, personal health. And so I can go to this app and I can say, okay, here's my personal profile, and I can just enter a few details about myself. And maybe I want to decide what my goals are, so I get a few goals hints here. Let's say that you might guess I ought to get a little fitter. Perhaps that would be a good idea for me. This is an application that's going to then help me to monitor my training program. I can pick out some exercises from a set, and then once I've picked one, I can go ahead and do it and have it monitor my progress and run my heart rate monitor for me and all that kind of stuff. So it might give me a few hints and tips, and whilst I'm training, I might want to watch something on the TV, and that will allow me to do that right here in the application. So you can see that it's a fairly rich, easy to use, kind of drag and droppy, resizable. Feels a little bit like a web application, but it's running right on your desktop. quite a powerful thing to be able to use. And it's that kind of application that you can build in WPF. I just want to flip back to my slides here. So you saw iBlocks and the British Library application. I said that I'd come back to this. So there's a URL right down the bottom there. Don't worry, the deck is going to be on the ComNet afterwards, so you don't have to scribble it down. But there's a starter kit that will let you build this kind of application for real. So you've seen the AdventureWorks Pulse application, and now let's go ahead and look at what it takes to start building that kind of application in Visual Studio. So this is Visual Studio 2008. We can just go ahead and create a new project. And you can see I'm actually in a Visual C# profile here, but all of the things that you're seeing me do here can equally well be done here in Visual Basic. So all of the application types that I'll be talking about are also supported there. I'm going to create a WPF application, but while we're here in this screen, I think I'd just like to review a little bit the kinds of WPF applications you can create. So a WPF application that I'm creating here will be a standalone exe, so the regular kind of application that you would deploy to someone's desktop machine. Also available to you are a user control library. Now, anyone who's been around Microsoft development for a while knows exactly what a user control is and what it does, just a little piece of encapsulated functionality. They're no different in WPF in that sense. So it's a nice, easy way for you to tuck away a collection of related functionality and share it and reuse it. You can also create a WPF browser application. So that turning the pages app that you saw at the start, that's one of these. It's also known as an XBAP, but a WPF browser application is what we call them in Visual Studio. And if you're looking to create reusable controls for consumption by a broad range of people, you probably want to be looking at building custom control libraries. That's not going to be covered at all in this talk, but there's plenty of material that I can point you at that will help you get started with that. But for today, we're just going to go ahead and go with the WPF application. So let's have a quick look around. We've just created our first application, and we can see that we have this split view. And inside it, we have a design surface up here, which has a window and this thing called a grid inside it. And you notice that as I move around, there's a synchronization of selection between the different components. So this XAML stuff down here, which defines what's going to appear up here. I can see that I select the grid when I select it up here, and likewise, if I select the window, you'll see it changes selection up here. That's pretty useful when you start to get a larger application, and I'll show you some of that as we go. We have the familiar property browser here, which has been in pretty much every development environment that Microsoft has produced for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, probably more, allowing me to change the properties of whatever I have selected. A Solution Explorer, and we'll come back to this guy as well. There's a document outline, which is actually worth showing when you're looking at WPF applications. So we're ready to get started. We have our window here. It's a little bit too small for our application, so I'm just going to size it up a little bit. And the first challenge that we have to work with is, you'll recall that the application had a kind of fluid way of laying itself out when we resized the window. So what we really need to do is to get that top section where the tab strip was that had all of the controls in it. We need to get that guy fixed so that it doesn't resize, and we need to set up the bottom section so that it does. And that's our first challenge. So to do that, we could dive into the XAML here, and we could start working away inside the grid control. But grid, which provides you the kind of control over flexible layouts like that, is one of the containers, the layout containers, for which we provide a special design time experience. So you can see that as I hover my mouse here, I get a little grid rail appearing, a grid line. And that's telling me that I can create one. And you'll notice that right here, I've created a pair of grid rows. And I can easily resize those, position them, get everything set so that I can reposition the way I want. Now, something I'm going to have to dive into the XAML to do is what I really want, if you notice, just take a careful look at the XAML down here. The two rows that I've created are both what's called star size. Now, how many of you come from a web development background? I'm guessing at this conference, most of the developers, right? So you've used tables before. You know what table layout feels like with percentages. This is a whole lot like that. So star sizing is really split the proportions that are in the star according to the numbers that are laid out in front of them. So in this case, we're splitting the available space in a ratio of 80 to 338. Now, actually, as it turns out, what I really want is for the top section here to be a fixed amount. And to do that, there are three really useful kinds of row definition, or column definition if I was using a column. There's fixed size, which is a fixed number of device-independent pixels, okay, which is what I'm using here. There's star size, which is the default, which is how we think a lot of application layout is going to be by default. And then there's automatic size, and that's all about sizing to your content. And in fact, actually, that's a bit of a WPF tenet, that sizing to your content is a very normal thing to do. In this case, we're going to fix the top size. I'm going to allow the bottom section of our application to float. We can't really see everything that we're doing here, so it'd be nice to use our little zoom control up here. That little button there just allows me to zoom up so I can see the whole of the pane. And I'm happy that that's going to give me the resize behavior that I want. So for my next step, I'm going to add a few controls. So you'll see that we have a pretty large selection of controls available here. These are all of the out-of-box controls that are provided inside WPF. You can also put your own controls up here, and that's something that's pretty easy to do. So, excuse me a moment. Just want to check out that resize behavior is working the way I want it to. And so one little trick that I can use here, you notice that I've got XAML and IntelliSense appearing here. And what I'm going to do is, just at runtime, I'm going to show the grid lines so that I can see what's actually going to happen. You see it's showing me the grid line here, and I can see that the top section there is staying fixed, whereas the bottom section is sizing to fit the remaining content, and that's exactly the behavior that I want. I'm just going to go ahead and add a little reference here. Or not. Okay, so I'm going to flip back to the slides here for a moment and recap a little bit on what we had going there with the layout. So the layout system that we have allows you to use that grid. I mean, you saw the syntax that was being generated there, and it's perfectly okay for you to want to start entering that stuff yourself. It's good to have control. But the grid helps you, by having a designer on the design surface, to use that grid easily without having to really understand all of the XAML that you're learning. And it's actually a pretty good way to learn how that API works. It gives you easy control over the layout behavior when you resize the application. And what I didn't show you there was that we have a number of other containers that are supported with special design time behaviors, including the canvas, which lets you lay out in a good old-fashioned XY coordinate-based way. And we have some limited support for dock panel and stack panel, so you can drop items into those, and in case of the stack panel, you can move them in and out and stack things up. Stack panel is a really great little layout control that allows you to get horizontal and vertical stacks working very quickly, and that's supported as well in our designer. So I'm going to flip back now a little bit further along in our application development. And what you're going to notice here is that I have a couple of custom controls that I've positioned here. So I'm just going to show you a few things about the design surface here. Notice that as I move this custom control around, I'm getting some highlighting. I don't know if you can see that throughout the room. Can you see the blue highlight there? That shows me exactly what cell of the grid and which container that I'm going to get And you'll also see a few snap lines appearing there that allow me to tell whether I've actually got this control positioned correctly. So that's really neat. I can tell which subcell it's going into. And it's taking care of an awful lot of work for me under the hood here. So remember, we're using this selection synchronization here. We'll come back to the document outline in a moment. You can see in the selection synchronization that this control we're manipulating here has had a particular margin set on it. If I select this guy here at the bottom, you can see that he's automatically been planted in the correct grid row with the correct alignment. You're in full control of that stuff. So I'm just going to take hold of this logo control here and move it around a little. And you can see that as we position, when we land, we get these little arrows. Can you pick those out from the back there? And what those are telling us is that it's set us up to align so that when we resize, I mean, clearly, we don't want things just to randomly reposition themselves when we start to resize. We want to control which edge things are docked to, how things are aligned. And these little widgets that are appearing here allow us to do that. And they let us switch the behavior too. But you'll notice that as I move this thing around, I actually get a different outcome by default. So if I place up here, I get a different alignment to if I place down here. Or if I place where I really want it, which is over here on the left. I can also switch manually if I want to be different from the default. But we think that this mechanism actually is going to get you, a lot of the time, what you want. So you're in full control, but we try and do something right for you in terms of getting the alignments correct. And the nice thing about this is that what will now happen when I run this thing is if I resize, this guy will stay bottom and left. This guy will stay docked correctly in this cell. So we know pretty much, as we're designing, we know exactly what we're going to get when we run. So I've added a number of custom controls here, and they're all in place. But things are moving along. Let's just run this application up. It's a little bit larger than the application I was running before, so as you can tell, I've added a fair bit of stuff here. And we've moved along more in the direction of the place that we really want to go. So we see that we have positioning the way we want it. Everything's resizing the way we like. But the style doesn't quite look right, and we're missing that nice background. This guy doesn't quite look the way we want it to be. We're not quite happy with that kind of layout. So we just want to close that guy. So first off, what I'm going to do is just add that background that we saw. So I'm going to take hold of an image control. I can drag and drop from the toolbox in the familiar way and place my control. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an image control at the background here. And you notice how I'm docking it using the design surface. I didn't have to touch the XAML at all. It's set everything up the way that I wanted it to be. In fact, actually, it has placed it in the wrong place. But this gives me a good chance to talk about the document outline here. I've placed my control accidentally inside this canvas. Now, I can see that I've done that very clearly by using the document outline control. And you notice that as I move over that document outline, it gives me a little preview of what component I'm actually going to be selecting, so that I know ahead of time what I'm going to be getting. It has a friend down here at the bottom, which is called the path control, which gives you a more hierarchical view on what objects you're constrained to selecting. So here I can select my children. But just to give you that idea that you're going to have a visual preview of what it is that you're going to select. So I've managed to mess up here. I've managed to plant my image in the wrong place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the XAML here, which I can quickly do using the document outline, and then move it to the right place, because I really want that item to be here. And that logo control, yeah, he shouldn't be there either. I'm going to move him down here. So what I really want to do now is to pop that image with that pleasant background that I was using. So to do that, I'm going to select my image control, and I'm going to use the Property Explorer to set the source on my image. Now I'm hunting around here, and that's kind of hard work. So what I really want to do is narrow my options down a little bit. We can see we've got a little search option here that allows us to find the property we need without having to hunt and peck quite so much. And I happen to know that the pattern that I'm looking for is here. I'm going to set that guy. And we should leave that alone. Be seeing it. So I mentioned earlier that Visual Studio is not the only show in town. And you noticed that we had a style that we were working on in that top bar, which wasn't really working the way that we wanted it to be. One of the things that you really need to realize about Visual Studio is that it's set out as a developer's tool. It allows us to work very well in XAML. It allows us to get our XAML IntelliSense working. It allows us to do the basics of layout. And it allows us to create controls and so forth. But it doesn't really have the tools that you need if you're really going to start working in the world of design. If you're wanting to customize the look and feel of your application, the tool that you really need to be working with is Expression Blend. And a tool that the actual version that we're looking at here is the current CTP, which ships with the new capabilities around Silverlight. And this application is capable of handling that, but actually the features that we're using are available right there from Blend version 1. What we're going to do is we're going to dig in and take a look at what we need to do to smarten up the look of this application. So you'll notice that we've got the same solution opened right here, the same application that we were working with before, and that one of the great advantages of working in Blend is that Blend and Visual Studio share a common project format, and a common solution file format. And also, most importantly of all, they share the capability of working with XAML. So they allow you to work seamlessly between the two spaces and provide just a different set of experiences in terms of the tools that they support. And the tool that we're going to work with today is going to be one that works with resource dictionaries. What a resource dictionary is, if you've ever used CSS in the web world, you'll be familiar with the notion of externalizing resources into a cascading style sheet, right? So that's just a very normal thing to do. Resource dictionaries take that a whole step further because they allow you not only to set properties, but to set up more interesting interactions like animations, and it's not just a case of setting a few colors here and there. You can also create control templates and plant them in resource dictionaries. So resource dictionaries are just a great place to place things that you want to externalize in your application. And this one, it contains all of the resources for the application that you've been seeing. Now, Blend hasn't provided anything here in the design surface, but you might be hunting around and thinking, well, how on earth am I going to start to edit these resources? And you'd be a little depressed if I told you that you had to go and edit this XAML. At least I think I would. I'm going to drop into the resource dictionary, and you can see that when I open this guy, it actually has a rich set of editors around all of those gradients and fills that I was using. And I can quite happily change one of those, and I actually get the kind of tools that you'd be used to having in a design application to actually alter those. So you can see that in this view that I'm showing here in the resource editor, all of the gradient stops in that gradient fill that I've been selecting are able to be changed, slid around. I can change the color. I can even flip over and make it into a tile brush if I want to. So I've got a much richer set of tooling in here. And Blend in general provides that kind of design experience, allows you to edit these kinds of resources, change them over, and hook them up. And hooking them up in this application, I'm just going to flip to my app.xaml file. And hook up the dictionary that I was just looking at. And now when I open my main frame, I'll see that that horrible light blue gradient that I was working with there is now in a much better shape. It looks a little bit more stylish. Things are working the way that they should. And so I generally feel happy with the world. I can actually present this app and not feel embarrassed by my terrible design skills. Now notice that this is an application that, although it's oriented around design tasks, is not just for designers. And there's a kind of common misconception out there that the Blend is only really intended for designers to use. It's actually not true at all. It's perfectly possible for a developer to pick up this tool and to use it to do the kinds of tasks that you need to do if you're going to produce a really beautiful looking UI. It should be friendly for designers, and we hope that plenty of designers will use it. And I don't know if there are many designers out in the audience at all. I think we said 4 or 5 of you, but there are certainly the more successful Blend projects do have people who have, WPF projects do have people on those teams who have some design skills and have some UI sensibilities that allow them to produce the kind of good looks that you're seeing in front of you now. So let's flip back to the slides and review a little. So flipping back to the WPF story in Visual Studio 2008, you saw that we were showing you some capabilities that allow you to do a little bit of IntelliSense for the custom types that I was using there. So you saw that I was using custom controls there. I was just as easily able to find out what the properties of those controls were as I was with any of the types that were built into the system. So if you've been around in this world for a while, you might recall, how many of you played around with the Visual Studio 2005 tools for WPF? 1 or 2? Yeah. You remember back then that there was a kind of schema-based IntelliSense that didn't really have an understanding of the custom types that you might create? Well, the new surface in Visual Studio 2008 is fully aware of your custom types. It works using reflection, so you get everything that you need there. You didn't actually see me create them from the toolbox, but you can create. You saw me creating built-in types from the toolbox, just as you've seen for many designers before. And something you also didn't see, but which is supported, and this is kind of important if you're going to be building large applications and you don't want to build everything yourself, is that it's perfectly possible to use licensed third-party controls as well. So we have a little licensing mechanism built in there that allows third-party control developers to ship a control and have it work when you're licensed to use it and not work when you're not. And you also hopefully got the message that it's pretty easy to move around in your XAML. When things start getting large, we provide you with tools like the document outline and the path control, and with selection synchronization with the design surface, so that the XAML doesn't become this impossible place to find your way around. And that's all good news. So I just wanted to talk a little bit more on the topic of Visual Studio and Blend and what they're for, why you might want to use one over and above the other. So Visual Studio 2008, you can see that it's really a tool that's oriented around development tasks. So over there you can see that we can do advanced layouts, which is a task that typically developers would do. You can hook up events. So right there in the XAML IntelliSense, I can start typing an event name and flip over into the event handler, or I can do the familiar double-click gesture to create an event handler for whatever it is that I'm using. and I can code edit. So C# and VB, or whatever my language of choice might happen to be, I can work away in the code editor in Visual Studio, get great debugging support. You've seen the XAML editing capability. What you haven't seen yet is the capability to deploy. And we'll come on to talking about deployment a bit in a moment. And that's all well and good, gives you a whole bunch of the tools that you need to get done. But really, I mean, if you took away anything from that set of WPF applications that you saw at the start, hopefully one of the things you took away is that you're going to need to do a little bit more than that, right, if you're going to get to something that's going to really leverage the platform. And so what you really need to be able to do is to do a little bit more advanced design work, to put in the kinds of looks and feels and transitions and animations that made those applications look as smooth and beautiful as they did. And to do that, you really need a tool like Expression Blend that's aimed at design tasks. So it also allows you to do advanced layouts and has a lot of the same features that we do in the Visual Studio design surface there. It allows you to get into editing control templates. So one of the things I haven't mentioned yet is that controls aren't what they used to be in WPF world. In the WPF world, you can expect a control to have a particular set of behaviors, but its look is entirely up to you. And that really means that the sky's the limit. We'll come back to that when we start looking at breaking down some of the applications that we were looking at earlier. And Blend provides you with the toolkit to work with those template editing operations. So it lets you quickly and easily dig around and refactor your control template and get it looking so that it's the way you imagined it, not like something Battleship Grey that came out of the box. It has tools built in to allow you to deal with timeline-based animation. So there's nothing in Visual Studio to do that. But if you really need to create something like that, you recall the beautiful, subtle animation you couldn't see on the background of the WPF application for booking sessions. And I'd really encourage you to go to the 1323.com site to pick that thing up and have a look at it, because it's quite a nice app, and it's actually quite useful. You've got at least another day to get some use out of it, so I hope that will be a help to you. But 1323 have that app. It's actually flagged from the MIX08 website. So you can get those nice animations working in Blend, and you can manipulate transforms. So one of the nice things about WPF is you're not confined to just the rectangle, and it's perfectly possible to start translating and transforming items in a way that makes them more visually interesting. But underneath all of that, and you see the section across the bottom, the thing that really ties all of this together is XAML. And especially resource dictionaries. Resource dictionaries are just a great practice for putting resources in a place where, when you've got a big team working on something, factoring out into one or more resource dictionaries for your resources to allow you to plant the resources that you're going to use on the different controls is just a really good practice, and it allows you to speak between the two tools without ending up colliding too often. And we have the shared templating system there. So let's talk a little bit about deployment. Who's interested in hearing a bit about deployment? Cool. Because the thing is with deployment is it's one of those topics that nobody ever wants to talk about until it's too late. Right? until you've actually got to the point where you're trying to figure out how this thing is really going to work in practice. But the good news about WPF applications is that deployment story is exactly the same as it has been for things like Windows Forms, where you have rich client applications, in terms of being able to use click once as one of your deployment mechanisms. Now, click once allows you to put up a web-based endpoint that allows you to fully version your application, and all of that is supported. If I just right-click, and I'll just show you where this is in the tool. If I was to take hold of my... That's not what you want to see. Application here. And right-click here. You can see there's a publish option. And if I was to publish there, it takes me through a wizard, which allows me to decide any number of endpoints that I might send my application to. So you can see I can deploy on a disk path, which is typically what you might do if you were deploying your app on a CD-ROM using click once. Or more usefully, I can put it up on an FTP server or a file share, or more usefully still on a website. So I can just have a little endpoint there that will allow my users to come visit my website, click on a link, and have the application drawn down to their PC and installed. And that's a whole lot easier than having to worry too much about MSIs. Now, MSI is obviously still an available deployment technology, and there are some times when you're going to want to or need to use that. But for an awful lot of scenarios, click once is really going to get you where you need to be. So the other question you want to think about when you're thinking about deployment is, where can I send these WPF applications? And the first place that you want to be able to send them is to Windows PCs running Vista, because WPF is deployed on all copies of Vista right out of the box. But that's not the end of the story. You can actually run your WPF applications on Windows XP and on Windows Server 2003 and higher. And so there are down-level redistributable runtimes that will actually allow you to do that, and you can bundle those up in your click-once deployment, no problem. And that'll help you to hit up a broader proportion of your users. Of course, it's perfectly open to you to use the standard Visual Studio Windows installer support for building an MSI for a standalone application, or you can use whatever third-party tool that you're traditionally using for building MSIs, and that will all work just fine. But the extra scenario that you've already seen in operation when we viewed that book site is you can actually use an XBAP, which actually under the covers leverages some of the click-once deployment. And the good news that you'll see, I don't know if any of you are already aware of this, but since we shipped the .NET 3.5 framework, it's also possible to use XBAPs inside the Firefox browser. So you can now reach a broader audience with those XBAP applications. So that's really good news. So I just wanted to revisit an application that you saw at the start and make sure that you kind of understand a little bit about what it takes to build one. Because it's easy when you look at an application like this to think to yourself, well, how on earth could I ever approach doing something that's of this order? And you might imagine that it was impossible. But I just want to break down the application for you and show you a little bit about its anatomy so that you can know where to start. So this is a richly restyled application. But you remember right at the beginning of my demo, I showed you how you got the layout working. This is really just another grid-based layout inside of Windows. So the outer layout that's outlined in red is just set up with a regular grid, and you've seen how you can do that. The menus that you see at the top here, they're restyled, but they're really just menus, right? So when you program against those things, the programming model is still exactly the same as it would be for a menu that wasn't restyled with a beautiful glassy look on it. And when I want to restyle those things, all I need to do is set up a resource in a resource dictionary and apply it to them either by key to a particular menu or by type to a whole set of menus throughout my application. And it's very easy to apply those styles. I start looking down here and I think to myself, gosh, there's an awful lot of custom control work there. Well, in a sense, there is. But these controls are really just regular controls restyled. So all that you're looking at there is a restyled on the left there, where you remember I pressed the buttons that allow me to do play and share and mix. Really, that's just a restyled list box with a few animations thrown on top of it that were done in Blend. And in the middle there, just a tab strip, which has been restyled. And another restyled list box over on the right-hand side. So those are just regular controls with a little bit of extra pizzazz thrown on top in the control template. Interior layout inside here is just done with another grid. So one of the nice things about the layout model is that it nests really nicely. So you can actually use all of the controls that I mentioned earlier, the stack panels and the canvases and the grids, just nest them down within each other to get the kind of layout effects that you want when controls are resized, not just when the window is resized. So once you've learned how the layout system works, it works at all levels. I mentioned that this is just a restyled list box. How many of you have worked with items templates so far? Yeah, cool. So an items template just allows me to describe the exact look and feel of an item inside a list, so that for every instance of a list item, I get the same look and feel. So here I'm just binding up images to an image part inside of an items template. And that's just a particularly styled text view inside an items template. And this guy is just to illustrate that you can consume. You remember that we had the big fancy spinning piece in here. This was just a custom control being consumed in this application. So let's look into the crystal ball a little bit. What's going to come for tools in the future? So Visual Studio 2008 has just shipped, but the ball keeps on rolling, and the team is already working hard on making sure that the next set of experiences that are going to be enabled are on their way. And we're going to start off at some point, and I can't give you a date, so please don't ask me. We'll be shipping a service pack, and just a few of the features that we've been looking at in that service pack are specifically designed to respond to the kind of feedback that we've had from people like yourselves who've already been out there using the tools. So one of the things that's coming back, been sadly missed, is the Events tab in the Properties browser. Yeah, can I get a round of applause for that? So that's a pretty hot item. A lot of people have been responding that we really needed to bring that back. It just missed the boat in terms of the first release, so that is going to be right there. I mentioned tab controls and how wonderfully easy it is to restyle them. Well, it wasn't particularly easy to use them on the design surface that we had. You really had to resort to using XAML. If you wanted to edit a tab control in Visual Studio 2008, well, you'll have a nice design time that'll allow you to select the tabs and add things on that visual design surface for the tab control. That'll be in the service pack too. Here's another one that hopefully will make the developers in the audience happy. Finally, XAML will have go-to-definition and refactoring support, which brings it right into line with the other languages in terms of those features. And for those who've been building larger projects, you might have noticed that there are occasions when perfectly valid XAML doesn't load in the designer. It'll still let you edit it, but you don't see anything right there on the design surface. We've narrowed a lot of those cases down, so there's an awful lot less times when you'll be seeing a screen that says we were unable to render your XAML, and we're very sorry about that. We'll have to be less sorry. There'll be more times where things will load properly. Now, I mentioned that there wasn't going to be any Silverlight content in here, and this is something of a lie, because there is a little bit of Silverlight content here. If you've been in any of the Silverlight sessions, you'll have seen that we've released a beta set of tools to go with the Beta 1 release of Silverlight 2. And that can install right on top of Visual Studio 2008. You can go and download it now. It's available from the links that were given out in all of those sessions that talked about it. You'll have seen it shown on a few keynotes and other bits and pieces around the show. And likewise, the Blend guys have been working hard to get a CTP out, which is also available today for working with Silverlight 2 applications. Hopefully, you'll find there's a lot of familiarity to you when you use the tools. So if you've been doing some stuff in WPF, in Visual Studio 2008 and Blend, you should find that it's a familiar story in terms of working with Silverlight, the kind of ways you do things. Maybe not everything is feature complete there, and there are some things that are not present. So for instance, in our designer, there's a read-only design surface, so it's just a preview pane right now. That's just a work in progress. But you'll still be able to use a lot of the skills that you've already acquired. And just looking further into the long-term future, one of the things we'll definitely be doing is to invest more heavily in productivity tools. So you'll have noticed that it's a lot of time spent in the XAML editor today in the designer, and that's fine. You can get your job done there, but there's a lot of repetitive tasks that we'd really like to see automated for you and help you to get done without having to have a great deal of depth understanding of XAML. And so we'll be working hard to invest in that. And what I'd really like to encourage you to do is right after this session, there's actually a whole bunch of folks from the WPF designer team here at the conference, and we're going to get together in the open zone. So I'd like to invite all of you guys who've been working with our stuff, and in fact, those of you who haven't and just have questions, to come down and give us your feedback about what you like, what you don't like, what you've seen and would love to see more of. And just to ask regular questions. There's quite a few of us going to be here, so we'll be available to ask more, kind of deep technical questions if that's necessary for you. So we'd particularly love to hear your feedback about what you'd like to see in future versions of the tool as well. So in summary, just to kind of cap off, you've seen that WPF enables you to build a much richer class of user experiences that incorporate UI and media and documents, rich document flow, text, and so forth. And that the WPF tools inside Visual Studio 2008 do enable you to do application development. And our goal going forward is, as I've said, to make that even easier, to add more rapid application development capabilities. And hopefully you've also seen that because of the way that Visual Studio and Blend interoperate, you can quite happily flow with high fidelity. And I was a web developer for quite a long time before I went to the dark side and took on program management, right? So I'm familiar with the way things used to be, and to some degree still are, in terms of the times when you hand over a comp, some Photoshop file, and you hand it off to the web developer, and the web developer scratches his head and wonders how on earth he's ever going to build that, or really what it quite means. It's very difficult to actually get a faithful handoff of assets between the two sides. I mean, there are plenty of ways that you can mitigate that, and there are lots of tools to help you do it, but at the end of the day, there's no single asset that allows you to pass things around between you when you're doing work between the designer and developer side. But that's no longer true. So Visual Studio and Expression Blend, working with the lingua franca of XAML, you actually have finally an asset that you can work on together with a common purpose. So there's plenty of time now for questions. So I'd encourage you to ask away here. But I do also want to re-emphasize that we are going to be heading down to the open zone in the sandbox. We'll be in Area 1 afterwards, and there's folks from our architecture team and QA team who are here to talk with you down there. And I'd love to hear your comments on this afternoon session and on the designer in general, because this thread will be this whole session will be posted online. Just along with all the other mixed sessions. And there's a little conversation thread piece there that allows you to give your comments, talk to us about what you've seen, and post online. Post freely. And don't forget your revals, they're sitting on your seats. So go ahead, question time. Can I encourage you to come to the mic so that we can record the... Have we got sound on the mics, guys?
What kind of support for 3D is there in WPF? And are you thinking on allowing the import of 3D objects? Sorry about that.
That's okay, no problem.
You're thinking on including some feature to import 3D objects from other applications like AutoCAD or...
No, I can't actually talk to that right now, but I know that there's been a significant set of advances. I don't know if any of you went to Rob Borrelia's talk on WPF 3.5. There's been some significant advances in terms of 3D handling and capabilities in the platform, in the WPF platform, which he's much more qualified to talk to than I am. So in terms of tooling, we haven't got any plans in that area, but I'd be interested to hear more from you in terms of what you'd like to see there. And actually, the guys who'd probably be even more interested to hear about that would be in the Blend team, because that's the kind of domain that they're very much diving into. But yeah, thanks for the feedback.
Hi. My team has been working with WPF for pretty much since the first bits came out.
Uh-huh.
And we've seen the designer come a long way, but still, we've got a lot of custom-based classes, and the designer just doesn't work because it won't get past that. And
So
I'm just kind of curious to know if there's going to be any support for, some more custom-based classes.
So I'd like to dig a bit deeper into your question. Are you specifically talking about custom-based classes that are derived from abstract classes, or?
They actually all derive right from Windows. So.
Right, and that's interesting. I think I'd like to hear some more about your specific cases there. So can you come along to the session afterwards? Cause,
yeah,
yeah, we're definitely interested in that scenario because there are most cases where it should work. And Brian, our architect, is here too, so we'd love to talk some more about that. But we know specifically that if you have an abstract-based class, it's not possible for the designer to work with that because we have to be able to instantiate your ancestor. But if you're just deriving from window, you should be fine there. And I'd like to dig some more into what exactly you're seeing. So, Brian, do you want to?
So you're deriving from Windows?
Yeah, we derive from
I misheard you. I thought you said you were deriving from milk in minutes.
Yeah.
I was really interested in what scenarios you're
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk some more about that. But that really should be working for you. Abstract-based classes we know about, but concrete ones, especially the ones that are out of the box, you really should be able to get away with that with no problem at all. So, yeah, we'd love to talk some more about that offline.
All right. Well,
Okay.
it'd be nice to use Designer. I've been a bit of a source code editor up till now. So.
Yeah, and absolutely, we really hear you on that. And like I say, we have a very strong aspiration to put a lot more rad design features onto that design surface and give you something that's a little closer to perhaps what you've seen if you worked with Windows Forms in the past. Okay?
Okay, thanks.
Hi, it's a pretty particular question with regards to deployment. Is there going to be any sort of a support around the click once deployment for WPF that also has unmanaged code in it, like some unmanaged libraries and things like that?
I'm going to have to say that I really don't know the answer to that question, but I will try and get it for you.
Okay.
So if you can, once again, if you can hang out afterwards, give us some details and we'll get back to you on that question.
Okay.
But I don't know and I don't want to give you a nonsense answer. So.
Hi, I'm really kind of new to this whole idea. You talked about the different application templates, the web deployment project, and the kind you show up here.
Yep.
I'm trying to get a sense of what's the line between a web application and the ones you showed, and what would be some use cases there?
Sure. So, XBAPs do have some constraints. So you'll have noticed that that XBAP that I was showing you, it didn't really reach out and talk to local data on the local machine. That's one of the very particular constraints. XBAPs run in partial trust mode, so if you've worked with partial trust before, you'll be aware that imposes certain restrictions on what you're able to do in the machine environment, whereas an installed XE has full access to the local machine, and that's really the big difference between the two. So scenarios where you need to do that, so for instance, if you need to be a thing that handles documents and works with a full offline scenario, then you're probably going to need a full XE for that. But if you've got an experience that just is really about exploiting the richness of the graphics and doesn't have those other requirements, then it may be that an XBAP is a better fit for your requirements. The other interesting question that you haven't asked, which kind of is begged by your question, is when would you do the XBAP versus Silverlight? You're bound to ask eventually, so I thought I may as well touch on that. And the story there is if you have a requirement that's about reaching across multiple platforms. So clearly .NET Framework 3.5, 3.0, they're only deployed on PC platforms. You've got to use Server 2003 XP or higher to get that experience. Silverlight is obviously a cross-platform browser plugin, but once again, you are constrained to the confines of the browser, so there are some things that you accept in doing that. And also, you've got a more lightweight version of the .NET Framework at your disposal, so you haven't quite got all of the features by any stretch of the imagination. So it's horses for courses, and that's really what I can say on that subject.
Thank you.
Hey, in Windows Forms, the Windows Forms team would let me instantiate a design surface where I could drag and drop controls and let my end users customize the application a little bit more. Does the WPF designer team have a plan to make that a little bit better? Because the Windows Forms designer that I could instantiate, it was almost very undocumented, it was very hard to control, and once you put it in there, it was almost impossible to get it to do what you wanted it to do. Do you have any plans to let application developers who want to let the user customize certain aspects of the form at runtime do that?
So now I can address that pretty clearly. Unfortunately, it's probably not the answer you're looking for. So as it stands at the moment, our design surface is not supported for public hosting. So you can't rehost the WPF design surface that you saw on the Visual Studio Designer today. That's not in our plans either for upcoming releases, although we do hear the ask fairly often for this. It's actually a fairly large piece of work to put out a public API, and you've seen in the somewhat lacking documentation that, that's not something that's always been done perfectly. So I'm afraid the answer is no, you can't, and we'd still like to hear from you in terms of the particular scenarios that might want us to change our minds about. So, I mean, we're aware of a lot of them, and it would be really great if you would hook up with Brian afterwards, because I'm sure he'd like to talk to you on that subject. What we do provide, though, is a very rich extensibility mechanism within the design surface. So it's not really what you're looking for your particular point, but there's a great deal of flexibility if you're building your own controls to produce the kind of adorners that you saw, that I was dragging things around with and resizing them with, and perhaps doing even more rich tasks than that. You can build your own and attach them to your classes and have them show up in our design surface. And that stuff is definitely there and is being heavily leveraged by people who build custom controls, for instance. But I'm afraid in terms of the design surface, the answer is not the one you're looking for. So sorry about that.
I know it's not a Silverlight session, but well, you touched on kind of the question I'm about to ask, which is, it's been talked about XBAP versus Silverlight, and I was looking for some guidance on where the Silverlight library falls short. One of the things that's been mentioned a few times is that 3D is not possibly rendered, but yesterday we saw a nice car rendered in 3D with Silverlight. So
yeah. I'll be careful at what you were looking at there, actually. I think the 3D rendering wasn't necessarily all done in Silverlight there. So if you look at that application, and in fact, I can put you in touch with the guy who worked on that. A lot of the 3D stuff was done actually in full-scale WPF, so the things you saw him working on the handheld PC, that's actually a WPF application. Although the zooming inside the cabin, that was done definitely with Silverlight. That's using the Sea-Dragon technologies. So it depends what you're trying to do. There are some very specific scenarios. Now, clearly with Silverlight, the aim of the platform guys has been to cut down the size of that runtime. So there's always an enormous amount of compromise involved in doing that. And they have to cut down to the very, very core scenarios. And I'm not a Silverlight platform guy, so I'm not really qualified to talk to their plans there, but I think you can expect to see them be very tactical in terms of how they grow that platform, and so as not to grow the size of the runtime, but to take on the scenarios that are most important for people on the web. So you mentioned about 3D, and it's not graphics accelerated, right? So because it's actually a platform agnostic runtime, it's very difficult for you to hook into to those things, and so whereas WPF, the 3D rendering is actually full hardware accelerated. It talks straight down the pipe to the hardware accelerator, and so you get a different kind of level of 3D performance there.
Great, thank you.
So WPF obviously enables more expressive design, and but if you're it also can, enable some design disasters as well. So,
yes.
And so if you're, Microsoft's released the user interface guidelines for that, developers can use to, figure out more or less, does it look like a standard Windows app, maybe a little prettier than before? Is there any plans in the designer to kind of know about those user interface guidelines and help people, maybe snap lines or something? It should be this far away. It should be.
That's certainly an area we're very, very interested in looking at for future releases. And whilst I can't make any promises, that's certainly something in terms of the way that we allow you to get hold of standardized styles and libraries of styles. There's certainly those are features that we're definitely considering as possibilities for future releases. So Brian can talk to. Yeah.
So we don't have an extensibility model or a style model for that, but in the SP1 bits that we're working on right now, we do have sort of predefined CUI guidelines for margin snaps and things like that. So we can kind of drag yourself around.
Oh yeah, I should. Yeah, margin snaps is definitely.
But what's not there is the ability to customize that by style.
Yeah. So we're reaching towards it in the SP, and there'll be future releases that will definitely address a lot more of that problem, because we're fully aware that people can do some terrible things with very powerful platforms.
Question about the designer. Again, well, first comment. Couple relatively small things, but brilliant things in retrospect look small, like name and search there. Makes using every other mode of Visual Studio seem like the 1950s.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So this is an out-of-the-box question. One of the things that I run into, a lot of my devs do, whenever working in Visual Studio, after 20 minutes, you've got 47,000 files open up there. a lot of them are the XAML and the code behind that are joined at the hip that I know for historic reasons and for interfacing with Blend have to be different files, but are logically one thing. Why is that not another tab at the bottom?
That's Brian wants to talk again.
Sorry, I know the history on this.
Yeah.
So the original work that we did with the designer did actually have them all connected together as one set of tabs at the bottom. And usability actually tested it kind of badly because for some reason, people were kind of accustomed to seeing different files for that. So we broke them out and made them separate.
Yeah, it's interesting that though. It's and I think we're always very interested to hear about what would make you more productive. So I mean, do continue to provide that kind of feedback because it's just because we wrote off one particular kind of design doesn't mean we might not think of some more smart ideas that maybe would use a test a little bit better, right? So it's a good point though. And it's, in terms of managing large numbers of open and active documents, there are certainly a lot of people thinking about that very problem right now. So you can expect to see some changes in that area, but I really can't be more specific than that.
Yeah, I understand that Blend is written in WPF.
That's true, yes. And so is our design surface, by the way.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
That's my question, is whether the IDE or design surface was written.
Yes, it is. The design surface is written in WPF. And in fact, this is an interesting little technical aside. The design surface that we are building for Silverlight will also have its adorners built in WPF as well. So there's an interesting little technical tidbit for you there. But yes, it is. It's a WPF app.
You mentioned there were some shortcomings with Click Once and WPF. What scenarios does Click Once not work in?
I think if you need to mess with the registry, for instance, then Click Once is not going to really do it for you. You need to resort to if you need a custom build task, for instance, or a custom installation task, then there's no support for those in Click Once. Those are the kinds of constraints. Actually, it's pretty well documented. If you look up on MSDN, there's a set of great articles on Click Once, and one of them specifically addresses the when to use it, when to not stuff. But the one that I'm very much aware of is registry setting changes. You just can't do those in a Click Once.
We have a communications department and a development department, and I can already see a lot of fight going on within designers that are using Max and Photoshop. And then I have my own designer that probably will start using Blend. How do you go from one to the other without having to hire one of the Photoshop guys and put parallels and install Blend and force him to do this? Or
so it really, does this boil down to the question of will there ever be Blend on the Mac?
No, or maybe the expert in the enterprise branding that's telling us how things should look for the enterprise, give us a Photoshop file, and then we go from there, put it in Blend, and go and
So what kind of workflow would you want to use there?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an interesting question, and I think that one probably much better addressed by the Blend team than by me. But I once again, Brian wants to comment.
So the interop there isn't very good today, but what I've seen people do that works pretty effectively is export the Photoshop file as a JPEG comp and then put that as a layer in Blend and soften it back, and then you have usually there's another crop of people that are coming into the development space that are interactive designers that are more in tune with what a control is and how to actually structure the UI. And so you put your comp in the background, and then you have your interactive designers basically kind of rebuild the comp.
So you basically need to do it all over again because you're losing all the fonts and using all the colors and.
Yeah. So that's a kind of onion skinning approach. Now I know that the Blend team do have some.
Is there a Blend team here that I can?
Yeah, there are people from the Blend team here. So if I think I can probably put you in touch with them. Although it's a big conference and they're doing other things from me, but certainly they're the guys who you really should be talking to about that because I know that they're looking at what can be done to make that workflow more smooth. So I'm sure your feedback would be most welcome to those guys. So I should say if you do want to get hold of me after this, my email is mwthomas mwthomas@microsoft.com. So ping me some mail on and put you in touch with the right people. To give that feedback to.
What do you tell people developing WPF apps who have a large investment in HTML since the Windows Forms browser control doesn't work very well? Obviously, you can rewrite as native WPF, but is there any...
So have you tried using it inside the... one thing I didn't mention in the talk is that there's interop between Windows Forms and WPF. So have you tried hosting it inside the Windows Forms interop?
Actually, I'm not sure. We
Right,
have a couple of uses of the browser control, and neither one of them satisfies all of the...
Because that's certainly a way that I've seen done, is that you can host the thing inside the Windows Forms interop there, and that does seem to work for a lot of scenarios. But if that's not working out for you, once again, let me know what your particular scenarios are, and we'll dig into that. So yeah, please come down to the open space. We'll be in Area 1, and we'd love to see you there. And thanks for coming.